Our theme, Ala Dvash V'Ala Oketz, the only Shemer's classic Israeli folk song. And in one of the stanzas she writes, Hashivenu ve'ashuva, Ela Aretz HaTova. Return us and we will return to the good land. I want to talk tonight about Purim. I know it's an unusual choice for Yom Kippur. But it wouldn't be the first time Purim has come to my mind this year. I've been speaking about Purim all year, and for good reason. Of all the books in the Bible, it's perhaps the most relevant to this moment in our lives in Jewish history, for the simple reason that it tells a story of Jewish survival in the face of destruction, of a Jewish community in ancient Persia, Iran, facing an existential threat that they didn't see coming. But there's a deeper reason connecting Purim, I think, to Yom Kippur. Is there? A 1,000-year-old rabbinic tradition draws a line between Purim and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippurim, the Day of Atonement, is read playfully as Yom Kippurim, a day like Purim. I know, all the light bulbs go off in here. It's like, well, oh. Never thought of that. It's an odd phrase, and it first appears in the Tikkunei Zohar in the 13th century, and it suggests maybe there's something more to this analogy. Maybe the allusion to Purim is a key to what Yom Kippur is all about on the deepest level. So let's take a look at the Purim story. As many of you know, Purim is set in ancient Persia during the reign of a king named Achashverosh. And it, of course, tells a story of an evil genius named Haman who didn't expect that. Who with his evil machinations imagines destroying the people of Israel, the Jewish people. And of course, the story is all about a heroine named Esther, who's at the center of it. Esther, the orphaned girl who rises to become the queen of Persia. Esther is so well adapted that no one in the palace even suspects that she's Jewish. Her very name, Esther, means hidden. And that's precisely what she is. She's hidden. She is asked to hide her Jewish identity by her uncle Mordechai. Her given Jewish name is Hadassah. And she blends seamlessly into Persian life, achieving a high status there. Esther's concealing of her Jewishness is necessary for the narrator to underscore both the precondition for Jewish power, symbolizing survival through strategic assimilation, and the high stakes the story will set up for her choice to reveal herself, marking a pivotal moment of moral courage and identity affirmation. Esther's story is a story of hiding and coming out, loud and proud. Esther's moment, the one that defines her and saves her people, begins with a call to leave her hiddenness behind. After, as I said, Uncle Mordechai discovers the plot by this evil Haman to kill the Jews, he begs Esther to go before the king and plead for her people. This is her moment to embrace who she is, not just in private, but also in public, and to step into her Jewish identity with all of its attendant risks. And at first, she hesitates. After all, she's safe where she is, isn't she? We can't overlook what Esther is being asked to do. She's being asked to give up her comfort, to risk her life, to stand exposed, and she has everything to lose. Mordechai, who sees her hesitation, her fear, and her instinct to hide pushes her with these words that make me cry each and every time I read them. Mi yodea. Who knows? He says to her, Im leit kazot higat lamalchut, that it was just for this moment that you have come to power. You were made for this moment, Esther. At that moment, he tells her and tells all of us that hiding cannot be our default. We can't live with the mask forever. So what happens next, everybody, is critical. Esther makes a decision. She steps into her identity. She reveals herself and stands up for her people, knowing the dangers. She realizes ultimately that survival can't always mean blending in or hiding. Sometimes it means standing out and taking a risk. She faces her fears and her desire to assimilate and rises beyond them. Here we are today, everyone, in the United States, living in a society where we as Jews have also become deeply assimilated. And it has felt safe, hasn't it, for so long. We have thought and still think that we've made it. But perhaps we've been blind to the dangers that have been growing all around us, not seeing the writing on the wall. Just to be clear, not all assimilation is hiding. Not all hiding is assimilation. Not all universalism is a mask for deep-seated antipathy to our particular Jewish identity. Sometimes we engage with the broader world from a place of confidence. We contribute Jewish values to universal causes, not as a cover, but as an expression of our own ethical core. There are moments when our universalism springs not from a need to blend in, but from an abundance of Jewish pride, a desire to bring the wisdom of our tradition into dialogue with the world. And yet, the challenge is to discern when universalism expands who we are versus when it reveals a reluctance to own the fullness of our Jewishness. When does reaching outward represent strength, and when does it stem from an impulse to dilute our identities for acceptance? When is reaching out expressing Jewishness, and when is it suppressing it? The question then becomes, are we genuinely broadening our horizons, or are we shying away from the unique gifts and responsibilities that being Jewish demands of us? This delicate balance calls us to engage with integrity, embracing the world without losing ourselves, embodying our distinct heritage even as we contribute to the larger human story. I've come over the last year to think about it in a particular way. Most of you here have heard of the famous fight-flight response to trauma, yes? Fight-flight? Yes, everybody? It's a big room. I just need to know. In the last few years, experts have discovered in the field of PTSD, of post-traumatic stress disorder, at least two other responses. Freezing is a survival strategy that has us play dead. And fawning is another strategy where appeasement and accommodation conveys that we're not a threat to those we perceive to be potentially dangerous. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. They're all automatic responses developed as survival strategies to protect us from immediate threats. In dangerous situations, fight enables us to confront a threat head-on. Flight urges us to escape, and freeze helps us stay undetected, while fawning allows us to appease others to avoid conflict. We have a dog that we just got 2 years ago, golden retriever, named Nala. The most extroverted dog you've ever met in your life. We can't make it out of the house before she sees somebody. And from a block away, other dogs, when she notices another dog coming to her from a block away, she's already on her back, showing them her belly. I'm not a threat. Don't have to worry about me. I just want you to scratch my belly or do some other dog-like activity. These responses can still be helpful in genuinely dangerous moments. They become problematic and tricky when they're misused or relied upon in situations that don't threaten our survival. For example, fawning, excessive appeasement, may once have helped us avoid confrontation, but when it becomes a chronic response, it can lead to self-abandonment and the loss of who we are. Recognizing when these responses are useful and when they inhibit our well-being is essential to finding balance and responding authentically. We Jews have strategically assimilated for centuries. It's part of our DNA. It is what enables us to draw from the cultures that we are in, to take what's best and to make it our own. But maybe sometimes I think that we fawn too much. Esther's story reminds us that there are times when hiding becomes dangerous. And even here in America, it's time to open our eyes and stand as we are without shrinking or hiding. In many ways, Jews have too often been complicit in our own erasure, especially in the liberal spaces where many of us live, work, and advocate. We Jews have worn masks for millennia, living under Christian or Muslim rule in Eastern Europe or the Middle East. Our people have adapted, surviving through this skillful self-effacement. This learned behavior helped us avoid drawing too much attention to ourselves, allowed us to assimilate enough to be tolerated and maintained our identity. In many ways, survival meant walking that fine line, fawning just sufficiently to avoid persecution while hiding, but still trying to preserve what made us distinct. As we walk around in liberal circles today, self-criticism is the hallmark of human progress and, for that matter, a core of spiritual practice. And in those circles, it is maybe one of the highest values. We witness and maybe even participate in a ritual where we might have to be seen as virtuous by virtue of our willingness to be self-critical. The good liberal emerges in us when we renounce any sign of being overly tribal. There was a story about Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, the great troubadour, the singer who used to go out to Jewish youth on college campuses. He used to relate that when someone would come up to him and say he was a Roman Catholic, he would believe him. When someone would say that he was a Protestant, he would believe them. When someone would say he was a Muslim, he would believe them. But when someone would say to him, "I'm a human being," then Rabbi Carlebach knew that he was a Jew. This is typical of the contemporary Jewish reality, assessing our universalistic instinct while eschewing our Jewish identity and our people's dreams. Some of you here tonight may do this yourselves. I know that I have done this. I can be honest. Jews that bend over backward, engaging in this kind of over-the-top self-critique, expressing what we hope comes across as an evolved, non-tribal Jew. This critique signals that we've transcended our insular interests, embraced the broad strokes of universalism, which is, of course, a value that we all cherish. But is this behavior solely motivated by an honest inquiry, or is it, once again, a masking, a fawning that grants us access and safety within a group? Such actions seem to say, we're the kind of Jews who don't just think about ourselves. We're not too parochial. We're open-minded, unafraid to challenge our practices, our perspectives, our beliefs. But ask yourself, and here I want to ask myself with you, how many of you have ever been in an airport where you see an Orthodox or an ultra-Orthodox or some version of the externalities of Judaism on display as they shuckle and pray in the corner of the airport? Okay, I see a lot of heads nodding. Maybe it's you, maybe it's, you might have seen it. And if I were to have a thought bubble above your head at some point, I wonder what you would be thinking. I'm sure all of you have the holiest of thoughts. I'm sure all of you are thinking, wow, what a beautiful, reverent, devoted person. So lovely. maybe even a distant cousin. Maybe I'll sidle up to them and say, hey, how you doing? Menachem? Yeah, David, nice to meet you. I wonder how many of us sit there and cringe and think, does he have to be so Jewish in public? Really? Is that the best foot forward for us? I'm sure no one ever thought that. That's just me. We avoid centering our Jewishness, fearing that doing so might appear defensive, nationalistic, jingoistic, superstitious, or worst of all, the Ur sin, tribal. I had a colleague a rabbinical colleague whose publisher told her when she wrote a book about anti-Semitism that it centered on Jewish pain too much. I'm not kidding. A professor told my niece at Columbia University the same thing when she dared to bring a Holocaust story to her class. It was a class about the Holocaust. But she, as a Jew, wasn't allowed to bring it. It centered her Jewishness. Today, however, liberal Jews may feel trapped in this very habit, caught between not being Jewish enough and too Jewish. In a world wrestling with race, Ashkenazi Jews are often seen as too white, which may imply privilege, and yet not white enough, signaling otherness. Not to mention, of course, Jews on the margins who don't fit into any of those categories. We are ever attuned to the Gentile gaze. We are. We are constantly attenuating our Jewishness like Goldilocks, trying to fight the right balance to be just the right Jew. This instinct to fall and to navigate through gentleness, to avoid confrontation or otherness remains. But ironically, at a time when embracing one's entire identity should be our strength, we become adept at signaling that we as Jews transcend tribal concerns. We value universalism above all particularity. And in that moment, we're hiding like Esther behind our masks. Today, Jews are still targeted for being Jews. In spite of all the fawning, it doesn't seem to work. And now, not just being a Jew, but having the audacity to make a claim on the word Zionist. Zionism or Zionist, a label with which most Jews identify with, has become a criminal label. And in response to this threat, we are witnessing fawning. How else do you explain otherwise well-intentioned, beautiful, amazing leaders who understand Torah and Judaism, bending over backwards to show the world that, yes, of course, it's all our fault. It's all us. We are indeed guilty as charged. In New York this year, heightened tensions saw a wave of incidents that targeted Jewish identity, and none worse than a group within our lifetime, which only yesterday in the New York Times publicly praises Hamas's approach to armed resistance, quote unquote, read it as murdering innocent civilians. And a group of them set out in Manhattan this year to openly chant support for terrorizing Zionists, including, I'm sure, what many of you saw, a disturbing subway scene where they came onto the subway and shouted for anyone that identified as a Zionist to get out. This kind of anti-Zionist antagonism blurred quickly into overt anti-Semitism as ironically masked protesters, but now we understand, of course, masked, on the subway demanded Jewish writers to disembark under threat. According to their leader, whose name I will not mention from this podium, there's no place for Zionists in New York. Jews in America, wake up. Jews in America, wake up. We have to realize that we too have no place to hide, no boardroom, no cultural institution, no matter how venerated and full of history. There's no safe place, as it were, that we should even seek. Against this attempts to silence parts of our identity, there are people who are choosing to be visible with their courage, to step forward as Esther did, knowing that there are times when the cost of hiding is far greater than the cost of being seen. Today we're called to stand fully like them in our Jewishness, proudly and openly connected to our people, history, and values. Today, friends, the masks are off. Friends and allies of the Jewish community are called to stand proudly in support of it. True safety will never come from disappearing or downplaying our identity and our affiliations. It can only come from the strength that we build together, the resilience we embody, and the unity we create by refusing to shrink from who we are. For Jews who had distanced themselves from Jewishness, the events of 10/7 shattered the illusion of safety that blending in or self-effacing might have offered. In the wake of such trauma, some found their way back to their Jewish identity, not out of a choice, but out of necessity. October 8th, Jews. They realized that despite their past masking or self-critique, they were bound by the same threats, the same shared history, and ultimately the same deep-seated pride. These individuals exemplify what it means to be Esther, to unmask on Yom Kippur, not as an act of fawning or concession, but as a reclamation of their fullest self, a defiant choice to stand fully within a Jewish story, even when the choice feels vulnerable or exposed. Such stories, I've heard so many stories in the past year, incredible stories. Each one of them moves me. And one in particular that I want to share with you tonight is deeply personal to me. The story of someone who reclaimed their fullest Jewish self. Anna Levy-Lyons is a member of the Romamu community, and she's here tonight. She's an insightful and compassionate Jewish spiritual leader who happens to also have been a Unitarian Universalist minister. Her journey as someone who grew up unaware of her Jewish heritage and later discovered her roots has profoundly shaped her understanding of identity, belonging, and the weight of historical trauma. In a recent letter, she wrote to her community in Brooklyn, expressing her personal reflections on the challenges she faced as a Jew in today's world, particularly in moments of crisis and tension. Her words capture the struggle many of us feel. I want to share them with you now as they bring light to our collective experience. Anna wrote, "Since October 7th, some of you have been urging me to make a public statement about my position on the war in Israel and Gaza. This letter is not that statement. It is a personal letter explaining why I cannot make that statement. I likely became a Unitarian Universalist minister instead of a rabbi because of anti-Semitism. Specifically, it was the anti-Semitism of my parents faced growing up in the 1950s New Jersey that drove them to hide their Jewishness and to raise me not even knowing that I was Jewish. My parents were only in New Jersey instead of Poland or Russia because their grandparents had fled to the US to escape the pogroms, the massacres of Jews in Eastern Europe. My great-grandparents were only in Eastern Europe instead of Israel, Palestine, because of the Roman massacre of Jews in Jerusalem in the year 70 of the Common Era, followed by their exile all over the world. And of course, it is quite possible that I only exist because my great-grandparents' migration to the US happened before the Holocaust." Anna writes that when she found out she was Jewish in her 20s, When I found out I was Jewish in my 20s, it felt like an unalloyed gift. I was heir to this gorgeous tradition of spiritual practices, rituals, music, and text, dazzling in their breadth and depth. I believed that anti-Semitism was mostly a thing of the past, oddly unaware of how it had quite literally shaped my entire life. But on October 7th, my people were slaughtered again. Some of them, peace activists and environmentalists, parents and children, Jews, very much like me and my family, except that the vagaries of history and fate had landed them there instead of here. I am 2 degrees of separation from people who were murdered or taken hostage on that day. Over the months since, I've discovered that I am Jewish for the second time. I've realized that I am heir, not only to the beauty of the lineage, but also to the trauma. My personal and ancestral history has created a deep well of trauma in me that I truly did not know I had. I know in my gut from reading history that every time Jews are accused of atrocities, whether or not it's true, see blood libel, the result is the massacre of Jews. And with the rise of anti-Semitic hate speech, vandalism, and even violence against Jews in this country, that makes my fear anything but theoretical. Anna Levy-Lyons. We are in a moment of collective trauma. Though many feel the appropriate response is to hide and fawn, not speak up or out, this is an Esther moment. And Jews don't own Estherhood. In fact, we've been at the forefront of almost every call to be an Esther that exists. To hear the silenced, to honor the particular, to stand up for freedom and safety. You don't have to go further than this lobby to see that. And there are so many incredible Esthers in the world. Esther was alive when Audre Lorde wrote, "Your silence will not protect you," pointing out the cost of silence. Esther was alive in Harvey Milk when he became one of the first openly gay elected officials in the United States, refusing to hide his identity. Esther was alive in Rosa Parks, who with a single act of defiance chose to sit rather than hide, and sparked a movement that would forever change the landscape of civil rights in America. So what does this have to do with Yom Kippur, you're all asking? It didn't start in the Purim story. Where it all began is the first story of hiding in our tradition. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge and felt shame, they hid. And when they hid, God called to them, "Ayeka, where are you?" As if God didn't know. There's a story told about Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of the Lubavitch movement. One year, the Russian authorities imprisoned him and falsely accused him of treason for his efforts to support Jews in Israel. And during his imprisonment, the Russian guard, curious about the wisdom that was attributed to this great sage, began to ask him all kinds of philosophical and theological questions. Amazing. One of the questions he asked was about God's call to Adam in the Garden of Eden, "Ayeka, where are you?" If God is all-knowing, why would he ask Adam where he is? Wouldn't he already know? And Reb Shneur Zalman looked at him and explained, "Where are you in this world is God's question. It isn't about geography. It is about you and your relationship with yourself and the divine purpose that you were born for." God asks Ayeka to each and every person, "Where are you hiding?" and invites us to come out from where we are concealed. Ayeka, where are we tonight, tomorrow? This timeless question of hiding coaxes us, listeners, to come out from wherever we are. Isn't the God of Israel saying to each and every one of us at this moment, How are you hiding? It takes a lot of courage to admit it, to step into the light and stand before God and others without our masks. It takes enormous ego strength to stand in the glaring light of truth, warts and all. It's so much easier to hide, to accommodate, to do whatever it is that we need to do to survive. And maybe that's what Yom Kippur is all about. Maybe that's why we're told today is like a day like Purim. It's a day not only to stand before God, but also to stand before ourselves, to ask ourselves honestly, what have I hidden this year? What parts of myself did I hide behind for the sake of acceptance, for the illusion of safety? And what will it take for you to step forward again, for me to step forward, unmasked? Yom Kippur brings us face to face with the parts of ourselves we might wish to forget, those masks that we wear, those secrets that we keep, and the subtle betrayals of self that we accumulate over a year. In that sense, Yom Kippur is a mirror, reflecting how we've strayed from who we are, and that just as Esther stands before the king exposed and vulnerable, we stand here tonight and tomorrow and all day, stripped of pretense, challenged to be honest about what we've hidden, compromised, or ignored. Ayeka, where are we? I was thinking this afternoon about the prayer that we just prayed, called Nidre. Its origin, at least according to many scholars, was a prayer that was instituted to absolve Jews who had hidden their outward Jewishness as either conversos or Marranos, and who wanted to be re-included in the Jewish community. We begin Yom Kippur by saying to those who hid, we get it. It's not always safe to come out. We can hold that. We can hold that Yom Kippur is about annulling promises that we made to ourselves long time ago that kept us safe but that no longer serve us. That Yom Kippur is about annulling promises that we made to the culture around us to sacrifice parts of our Jewishness in order to fit in. Yom Kippur is about that day when we annul the promises that we made that hide the true self that we are from our beloveds, from our neighbors, from our friends, the ways that we've compromised and fit into places where we might now show up differently with our full selves. What would it look like tonight to stand in our Jewishness or even a love for Israel, warts and all, without shrinking, without fawning? Let's fawn no more. Let's fawn no more. I can hear Mordechai's voice. I don't know can you hear it? There's a voice, a subtle one saying, who knows? Mi yodea. Is this the moment that you were made for? Is this the moment where you came out from hiding? Who knows if all of us, Jewish, human, all of us and all of us were made for this moment. Last thought, and leave you. No one's late for dinner, I'm hoping. It's just I know I was worried. I was just looking. You know, you talk for a while. In Hebrew, the work of Yom Kippur is called tshuva, to return. That return back to ourselves, to take off the mask, to stop appeasing in order to be accepted. That's tshuva, returning. It's a return to the self that we left behind in some hidden corner of our soul, waiting for us to come home. Come back and get this peace. That feeling that Naomi Shemer, as we began tonight, Hashivenu ve'ashuva, bring us home again. Bring us back to that good place, that beautiful land. It's impossible to go to the end of tonight's service without invoking how deeply each and every one of us I know is praying for the return of the hostages. Hashivenu ve'ashuva. I'd just be shocked to tell you that sometimes in various Jewish institutions that I've been a part of over the years, there's been a kind of fawning, a worrying about whether or not it was okay to be a bit too Jewish. The hostages are a humanitarian, not political issue. Those 101 hostages deserve to come home. Those 101 hostages, and we can say it and should say it and not stop saying it without any fear, without any looking over the shoulder. Those are my brothers, your sisters, our children. And so we wanted to bring them here tonight to be with us in our proud, strong, unapologetic Jewishness here on this stage. We stand with them. We pray in the words of Idan Reichel, come home, tachzor. Just surprise us, right? Maybe we'll just close our eyes and then open them again, and there you will be, hide and seek. Tachzor.